So, now we have done kinematics, motion in a straight line. Now, I am going to do in kinematics part only motion in a plane. So, motion in a plane see here, this is actually the 4th chapter of NCERT. Under this topic, we will be doing vectors, scalars as well as projectile. That is an example of the motion in a plane. So, now let us do about the vectors and scalars. First, I am taking scalar quantities. See, what are scalar quantities? See, those quantities which are described by only magnitude or represented by only magnitude are known as scalar quantities. Some examples of scalar quantities you can write like length, mass, speed, energy, etc. So, these quantities do not need any direction to describe, just these quantities are required magnitude to describe. So, these are known as scalar quantities. Now, see here scalar quantities can be added or subtracted just by algebra, which you have done already in the previous classes. So, now we will come back to the another quantity, that is here vector quantities. See, what are vector quantities? Those quantities which require magnitude as well as direction. Magnitude and direction are required to describe these quantities, but see here beside magnitude and direction, vector quantities must obey vector rules of addition. So, all these quantities should obey vector rules of addition, then only they can be said to be vector. Examples of these quantities, like you can take here velocity, acceleration, force, weight, etc. So, these quantities are known as vector quantities. So, now we know about scalars. Now, we have to come how do we represent vector quantities. If any quantity is vector, like if you have taken force here, it is a vector quantities. So, we can make an arrow over it, then this quantity becomes a vector, we call it force is a vector quantity. But if you take modulus of this value, this force like this, so now this has become a scalar. So, this quantity or the modulus of the vector is always scalar and positive. So, vector quantities or any quantity can be represented as a vector by making an arrow over it. But in NCERT book you may get like this, a force is written, but it is here darkened here. You will be getting a bold letter in books. This also represent a vector quantity. Now, suppose if you want to represent force or the length or displacement. So, how do we represent it? First we choose a point, that is called a starting point. So, this is called a starting point, or this can be also said to be here tail. According to the magnitude of the vector, draw a line segment. This arrow is here, that is known as your head, or we can say terminating point. Terminating point, and this length of the line segment represent the magnitude of the vector. If it is suppose the 5 centimeter, this much length, if it is the 10 centimeter, it will be double of this. So, the vector quantities can be represented by this. So, there is a one starting point, that is known as tail, and terminating point, that an arrow is made here, that shows here direction. Now, see here, as I have told you, this thing is a vector quantities can be added or subtracted, and also these can be multiplied by scalars also, by two vectors also. But the division of any quantity by vector is not possible, because it is impossible to divide a vector by its direction. So, these were the introductory part of the vectors and scalar quantities. Now, we will be seeing here many other concepts related to vectors in the next slide.